Welcome to another edition of the Capital Press Club Legacy Podcast. I'm Dr. Colin Campbell, and we are now in episode 12. Today in Black History, we have Satchel Paige, who was signed to the Cleveland Indians, the American League, back in 1948. We also have Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who performed the first successful open heart surgery, and he also founded the Provident Hospital in 1894. Now, what was special about Provident Hospital was it was the first interracial hospital. Before that time, there were no integrated hospitals. This hospital had black and white staff, so he is definitely a trailblazer in the medical industry. And now we talk about the issues. We have the struggles with black press. We also have the interviewing surrounding the current president. And with me to talk about those issues, my man in behind and in front of the scenes, Derek Kenney. Derek, how are we doing tonight, man?
Colin, it's a great night. It's a Sunday night. It's the weather is super hot outside, but as it gets late night, it's pretty temperate. So if you like to hang out, this is probably like the best time of year for you. If you're someone who likes to get out and socialize and be outdoors, it's a great time of year on the East Coast.
Definitely, but it's also great to be here with all of you and you as well, Derek, talking about issues surrounding Black society and in the media realm, because we know that there are definitely challenges when it comes to media and Black society, Black community coverage. And right now, the Omaha Star is talking about how it's trying to stay relevant as newspapers around the country are struggling to stay afloat, how they're trying to stay solvent, and how they're trying to stay relevant. And this really heavily impacts the black press. And the Omaha Star came out with an article this week talking about how it's trying to use different technological techniques to try to stay relevant in a changing media landscape where you do have a lot of attrition of different news stations and newspaper outlets. So they've talked about expanding online. They have talked about creating an archive dedicated to Black American history, which is also much needed, especially during these turbulent times when we see that education is being neglected surrounding Black society, when we know that textbooks have always been woefully inadequate and reflecting some of the representation within Black America. Derek, have you followed this issue a little bit at all? And what do you make of it? What's happening right now?
I would say I've certainly followed it over the years as a journalism student at Howard, where you had Dr. Clinton Wilson, who put together a book on the Black press, but also working with an organization called the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is a trade organization for the Black newspapers across America. And I believe at one point it was maybe over 200 Black newspapers across the country. And wow. The notion of working together and doing best practices and figuring out how exactly a print organization, not only a print organization, but an African-American print organization that's reaching out primarily to an African-American audiences across the country with hyper-local news, how are you going to stay relevant? And I think the talking about digital and being digital has been at the forefront. And you'll see organizations like the Washington Informer, who's diversifying their outreach with not necessarily podcasts, but live video presentations and live streaming, and using other forms of media that go far beyond traditional print. I'm not even sure how much of the reach of a Black newspaper nowadays comes through traditional pulp, print newspapers.
Yeah, I think that a lot of newspapers are starting to make that change, or they have been making that change from print to online format because they know that that's where most people are now receiving their information, particularly in the Black community, when they have done polls on just the way that we tend to share our information and get our information. We are getting our information online at very high rates, more than some of our compatriots in other ethnic groups and categories. So I know that part of the drive to stay prominent, staying relevant, is moving to digital spaces where you can diversify some of the content and you can reach people in areas that are not exclusive to the United States, where you can transcend geographic borders and share news and information across the globe. And I think that's where they're really making some inroads in trying to adapt and evolve their product and the way that they disseminate it so that they can stay afloat. Otherwise, they'll fall into the dustbins of history, like many publications have, because they simply don't have those conventional readers anymore. We have generations that are now being raised by tablets, by digital, by smartphones and tablets, almost right out of the womb. If you've ever seen some of these kids nowadays that can operate a tablet, they definitely can do it better than some of our parents or our grandparents for sure. And so that's where the attention is going right now.
Yeah. And when you look at where the money comes from, when you're looking for sponsors and you're looking for advertisers, which drives the monetization of these organizations, now you have clear numbers with digital. When you're using digital, you have page views, you have clicks, you have so many ways to identify activity of audiences and to show advertisers that you are successful and that people are reading your products, reading your newspapers, but then also that they are a viable tool for organizations, for advertisers to reach their audiences. So I think in a way it's a good thing, especially when you are effective at reaching your core audience, which I believe no other media organization might be quite as effective as the Black Press when it comes to reaching out to African Americans across the country. And I think that's been proven over the course of time. And hopefully now they're still able to compete. And we know, and this is actually in the shadow, in the wake of many larger news organizations, print organizations are struggling, and many weekly print organizations are shutting their doors. Many Black newspapers have found ways to remain relevant, keep their doors open, and continue to be valuable to the Black community. So kudos to them, kudos to NNPA, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and all the leadership. Was it Ben Jealous? No, I'm sorry, Ben Chavis. Ben Chavis is the leader of that organization. He's a fantastic, phenomenal man. He's actually history in itself. We got to get him on here one day.
How long has he been the chairman or the CEO of the NNPA? It's been decades, right?
It's been at least a decade, maybe two decades. Yeah. But he's been leader of quite a few organizations. But him and NNPA, I think they've been together for, it may be 20 years. It may have started in 2000 or so. I can ask Mr. Google very quickly as you stall for a little bit of time there.
Well, what's important is we look at issues that affect the Black community and Black society in a very visceral way. While mainstream media right now is caught up as to whether the president should run again, what lies the former president may be talking about, or Project 2025, those are all important issues. I'm not trying to downplay those. But when you have those kitchen table issues that are affecting Black people every day, those kind of get lost in the zeitgeist, overshadowed by some of these more salient topics that are, of course, regulated by gatekeepers who may not look like us. And even if they do, they are still very heavily influenced by those who don't. And so when you're looking at these papers that are in the communities, pounding the pavement, so to speak, and pulling out stories from our society and our different communities, that is very important, because we have to remember, although there are many millionaires in this country, there may be more billionaires in this country, that's not really trickling down to Black society, at least not in the proportional ways that it's doing with other populations in our country. We also look at some of the payment deficits that are happening, the salary wage deficits and disparities that happen within Black society. We know that there are health challenges, whether they are comorbidities and general access to healthcare, but just geographically where we're situated, where we might be next to plants, or we might be next to polluted rivers and things like that, where we have these geographic concerns. These are issues that are covered by Black newspapers, right? That look at issues that are affecting Black society in a quotidian way. What did you find out, Derek?
I found out he became president and CEO of NNPA in 2014. So 10 years. So 10 year anniversary. So we definitely have to get him. here to talk about that.
He
He's
would
been an
be a great
outstanding
person to have
leader,
on. I've met him a couple
certainly.
times at
Mhm.
National Association of Black Journalists convention. Always a very cordial guy. So yeah, and he
And the
can talk about.
organization also provides a newswire service to help provide access to local Black press newspapers across the country with national news stories and access to national newsmakers. They've gone to the White House and talked to presidents and things of that nature. And they also, on another organization to look out for when you're looking for news from the Black press, unapologetically Black, as she describes herself, Hazel Edney, former Capital Press Club president, has her own newswire, the Trice Edney Newswire, that provides content to newspapers across the country as well. So NNPA is a great source of power that helps um, uh, local Black newspapers remain relevant and fresh with content, and help supplement, as you mentioned earlier, the challenges when it comes to resources for organizations. But also Hazel Trice Edney, who we always want to applaud and say thank you for all that she's done with Capital Press
Yeah,
Club.
he still teaches at Howard as well. Yeah,
All right.
yeah. I think she still teaches at Howard as well. So while she's
Mm-hmm.
operating the wire, she's also, at least I believe, an adjunct professor too. So
Yeah.
she's really doing a lot.
And I think it's one of those things that we were taught when we went to Howard was in the School of C. Like, if as long as you are able to write and communicate effectively, you will always have a way to make money. There's multiple ways for you to earn revenue. Entrepreneurship. You can work for newspapers. You can be a correspondent. You can go from print to broadcast to public relations and spokespersons. There's so many different ways that you can earn a living in communications when you are an effective communicator. Um, that it really lends to being maybe one of the most productive career paths and flexible career paths you might be able to take.
Yeah, and right now we're at a point where people are communicating more and more through digital platforms, right? They're using
Mm-hmm.
emojis. They may be very terse when they are speaking. It's not too elaborate because sometimes their character counts or word counts. And so being an effective communicator is very important. But I think that's one of the hallmarks of the Black press is being able to communicate effectively. And one of the main fundamental points of being able to communicate effectively is what I teach my students is knowing your audience. And when you have a Black press that is intimate with their audience and their needs and their wants and the issues that are impactful to them, they know how to communicate those things effectively.
All
It's
right.
a lot different than when you have people from other communities coming into the Black community just once every blue moon when a crisis happens to talk about it. Black newspapers and members of the Black press have context as it happens and as things happen in Black societies and Black community. They have the history that they have talked about as well. They know the players, they know the chronology of everything that's happened. As long as they have been able to have access to those stories and being able to tell them and have the resources to be able to, again, go into neighborhoods and talk to various people and extract those stories from various neighborhoods, communities, and societies, they are the most impactful pieces of our media to tell Black stories and to make sure that those are salient. We have to remember that nowadays, because of media consolidation and the uses of progressive technologies like artificial intelligence, they usually conglomerate and collate a lot of news that is taken from the internet and put it out and then promulgates it, puts it out there, right? If you don't have content coming from the Black community that's covered, then that those stories get lost in the shuffle because only the most salient content gets covered and then again disseminated to the masses. And so that's another reason why it's important for the Black press. So it's good to see like members of the Omaha Star and
Mm-hmm.
other members of the Black press looking at ways that they can evolve and still stay relevant in a changing landscape that has not been too friendly to the Black press over the
Right.
years because they are those types of platforms are usually the first to go
Mm-hmm.
when funds run out and revenue starts to dry up.
Yeah. And I do want to say that for people out there that's listening or they're watching, that we're identifying Black press as Black-owned print newspaper organizations. So the ownership is African American, though sometimes the focus of the paper might be more diverse. We're talking about black-owned media organizations, print organizations, right, Colin?
That's right. Yeah, these are people who look like us who own these institutions and these platforms, not like, for example, necessarily BET, right? Where it's a content that is reflective of our society, but not owned by members of our society, or if they are, it's owned in a minimal way. I know that Bob Johnson signed it back in the mid 2000s and the mid noughts to Viacom, right? So it really wasn't owned by a black person anymore, but rather a group of people. And I don't know the demographic breakup, but I do know it changed from predominantly black ownership to not black
Mm-hmm.
ownership. Okay. So that's one thing, and we could that could be maybe another discussion of BET. We did have the awards recently on BET. Some of that was a bit controversial, but like I said, that's not really the focus of today's conversation. Maybe that's something we could talk about next week because it does involve communication. It does involve BET. It does involve some controversy surrounding Black society when it comes to representation
Yeah,
of
yeah.
who we are
Mm-hmm.
in media and on television.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, wait, are you talking about the Taraji P. Henson thing?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Taraji P. Henson was the MC,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
yeah,
And there's a
there's
couple
a
of
there's a
things that
lot.
we could talk about. So we may want to peel that onion next week because there's a couple of things
Yeah,
because
yeah,
there's a
yeah. There,
new because a black
yeah.
press is the oldest, I guess, media type of organization in the country. But there's the new type, a new wave of influencers and communicators that are not traditionally trained, like Keith Lee, that have tremendous influence and reach as African Americans in media. And he had, I guess, an encounter with Taraji P. Henson that was interesting. So we can talk about that next time because
We can
I don't
talk
know that
about
we
that
talk
next
enough
time. Yes.
about social media influencers.
That is a very good topic to talk about
Yeah.
because you have so many out there. As a matter of fact, there is the new black press. At least some people, some of the influencers are labeling it as the new black press. And it is important to remember Capital Press Club was created for black press back in the early 1940s or late 1930s, actually, the later years of the 1930s, to create a space for the black press when we were excluded from other places like institutions. That's right. The Press Club was created back then, and they were trailblazers in the way that they were able to create a space for members of the Black press to unite, to discuss issues, to host various newsmakers around that time, business leaders, and they kept going. And that's what brings us here today, actually, was the creation and the idea to create a space for members of the Black press so that they can stay relevant and they can have access to people and talk about events that are relevant to our society. Well, we do have another topic, and this one does encompass the current president, but also the termination, or rather, the resignation of a reporter from the only black-owned radio station in Pennsylvania, WURD. Word, right? So the issue there was she was fired because she used questions that were cleared by the White House first, and they had a discussion with her, and they said that the leadership at WURD said that the way that she used the questions that the White House suggested to her was not in line with their ethics in reporting, because what their argument was, and this is pretty standard, is that they're not a mouthpiece for any specific person or political affiliation. They are to report the news of the day. And when you are using questions that the interviewee gives you, and I'm not saying that Biden, singularly gave her these questions, but members of his administration gave him carefully worded questions, then it becomes more like propaganda. And we do know that the
Mm-hmm.
president came off of a kind of a lack, well, I don't want to say lack, kind of. It was a lackluster debate that many people have been talking about. I don't want to get into that too much in his assessment of how he did, but rather it's kind of the fallout and how it's affected another journalist who is now out of a job because she used questions that were given to her by his administration coming off of this debate. And of course, his administration is trying to make sure that they spin things positively so that there isn't this lingering legacy the next few months leading to the election that he's not strong enough to be a leader. And so he had an interview on ABC with George Stephanopoulos in the past few days. Also, it wasn't really a game changer. And now you had this other interview where I know that the president is trying to appeal to members of Black society as well, where he might be losing some support. But again, this is an issue that surrounds media ethics. And if you should screen or go over questions with your interviewee before the interview, and that is definitely something that is not in favor and not in line with proper media ethical values when you're interviewing someone. What do you make of this, Derek?
Two sides to it. One, I'm not I'm not quite sure if she was a journalist or not. A lot of times in radio, you have radio hosts that are more personality than they are journalists. So they might be editorial. What do you call it when a journalist is kind of has some discretion to be subjective, to inject their own
What is it, like
personality?
editorial license you're talking
Yeah,
about?
they have a lot more editorial license than say a news
Mm.
reporter out at the radio station. So that's one thing. The other thing is, from a PR perspective, you do provide ideas and suggested questions for to set the stage for the interview. Because a lot of times, there's the host will say, "What do you guys want to talk about?" That's part of your pitch, right? And then you'll send them questions. Like, we can send you a set of questions, but those are supposed to be a guideline. Very rarely are you expected to read verbatim the 10 questions that you're given, even if you are. Even if some of those make sense, like some of those questions may have made sense in terms of news value, in terms of what people need to know. But when you just take something from, again, an external organization without really giving it the full scrutiny and without vetting it and shaping it so that it suits your audience and so that it's balanced, then you do a disservice to your audience. And I think she did that. That was kind of I would say it was lazy. It was lazy communications. But also, I would say that it also might be a sign of the times where you don't have the staff. You don't have the team of producers to help to take that material from the White House and shape it so that you can present it in a way that's compelling, but still true and fair and objective for your radio station. And many years ago, a radio show host would not be blamed for the content of the program alone. That would be part of the job of the radio show producer. The producer should be shaping the radio program just as much as the host. And then the host will take what the producer gave them and put something together. And but I don't know. It's tough. It's tough. It's tough. She owned it. She was held accountable for it. She lost her job. Another instance where a communications professional that's been serving for quite some time lost their job for something they've done live on air. And this time it was showing a bias to the sitting president during an election year. And just as we say all the time, we are objective. So this is we're not saying anything one way or the other when it comes to Joe Biden. And we definitely aren't trying to make a judgment call for the radio station. But I
Right.
do think even in this era of limited resources for journalists and communications professionals, we still have a job to do to take the information that's given and reshape it, make it ours, and ask the questions that's relevant for our audience. And a lot of
Yeah.
times, as you know, when you have an interview, sometimes the job is to go left based off what you're hearing, or to go right, or to ask the hard question. I'm pretty sure WRD, I'm not sure if anyone's listened to WRD, but they're very progressive. They're kind of like WOL in DC, and they're going to tell it like it is, unapologetically black, and they're going to ask those hard questions. And if one of those questions for WRD was not something addressing his performance for the debate, then they've definitely done a disservice to their audience.
Yeah, let me tell you what CNN wrote really quickly here. It says radio host Andrea Lawful Sanders has resigned from WURD radio after admitting her post-debate interview with President Joe Biden included questions that were pre-selected by Biden's campaign team. The interview featured predetermined questions provided by the White House, which violates our practice of remaining an independent media outlet accountable to our listeners. And this is according to Sarah Lomax, the president and CEO of the Philadelphia-based station. As a result, Ms. Lawful Sanders and WURD Radio have mutually agreed to part ways effective immediately. And so
See, and
the
that's
word
I want to
Sanders
say,
resigned from her position
yeah.
and was not really technically fired, but I'm
Okay, I
sure it
do
was
want to say that's a bunch of, in
pushed
a
her out.
way,
You know, you
it,
did the wrong thing. It's time for you to go.
it's really tough though, because it's a bunch of malarkey. Because a lot of times for someone at a smaller station to get an interview with a national celebrity or national figure, they have to agree to a set of unspoken terms. And so that sound, I don't want to say it sounds like maybe a sponsor was upset with what happened, or an advertiser was upset with the balance, or I'm not sure. But it's not unheard of to have, say, for instance, we're not talking about the president. Say Brad Pitt wants to talk about a new movie, and there's a certain list of approved questions for you to ask him, and and you accept that. You know, a lot of hosts will accept that and present those. But I guess when it comes to something political in nature, when you're trying to be unbiased and you want to be nonpartisan, maybe it's a different standard. But it's not rare for a suggested set of questions from a PR organization on behalf of their client, to which in this case is the White House providing questions for the president. Is not unheard of. I don't think that's unheard of. But I will say again, though, it's up to the media organization to take those questions under consideration and to shape them and use them as they see fit, but also ensure that the news value they're providing to their audience and the value they're providing to the audience is true to the audience and for the audience's benefit, but then also, I guess, in line with the mission and values of their overall organization. And I guess that's
Yeah,
where the issue comes
there,
up.
yeah, there are different questions that sometimes an interviewee or members of the interviewee's camp will say are off limits, especially when it comes to entertainment, when it comes to who they're dating, or maybe some legal issue that they may have faced. Sometimes those questions are taken off the table, especially when they're trying to promote the latest movie or TV show or latest event or campaign, charitable
Mhm.
campaign that the actor may be engaged in. They want those questions off the table. However, maybe there's a different line, though, when it comes to hard news, and especially like you alluded to, Derek, when it comes to politics, and especially during an election year, and especially when we know that questions right now are going to be a bit sensitive because of uh, the debate that happened last week and how things came out. Everybody who interviews the president now will be scrutinized. I noticed that with Stephanopoulos' interview, he tended to really tried to push these questions, some of the questions through about how the president was self-analyzing his own performance and his own health and all of those things. There were a number of times when Stephanopoulos would just ask follow-up questions, basically repeating what he was saying before to make sure that the president was answering the questions comprehensively or as comprehensively as possible. And I think that when it came to with Ms. Sanders here, Lawful Sanders, there was this perception that there were these very softball like questions that really did not serve the interests of the public, or they seemed very biased. And I think that's what happened with her here. Now, what'll be interesting is how they plan to go forward. Will they try to get the former president on the station or something like that to try to balance things out a bit? Or if they will just look at this as a mistake and try to move on from there? I guess they'll hire somebody to fill in Lawful Sanders' shoes now that she's not there as well.
Yeah. And I'll say now, since I'm not in PR anymore, years ago when I did broadcast PR, radio hosts would routinely ask me for questions because they were not, a lot of times the word journalist is used freely. So in many cases, especially morning show hosts are not journalists. They have journalists on staff, but those aren't always the people interviewing the newsmakers. Usually, in many cases, the morning show host is a comedian
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Yeah. There obviously, especially now with digital spaces, you have people who are able to put out content, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're journalists. And then you have those who are hired by various publications or radio stations, and do they have that depth of understanding of media ethics and media tutelage? And the answer to that may be no as well, especially if they're younger. They may be learning on the job. And unfortunately for Ms. Lawful Sanders, she learned a very hard lesson. Even if she felt like she was doing the right thing, there may have been a better way to handle this, maybe making sure that she spoke with her leadership about what the White House was trying to do, or just coming up with her own questions altogether and just saying, listen, that's not really an ethical thing to do. But we want to say thank you to all of our viewers out there. We want to say thank you for watching another edition of the Capitol Press Club Legacy Podcast. I am Dr. Colin Campbell, joined by Derek Kenney, and we will see you next time.